Hello friends, this is Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn for chessopeningsexplained.com, and today I want to share with you a very important line of the accelerated dragon, which is the main line where white castles short, which is e4, c5, knight c3, well, knight c3, knight f3 doesn't matter, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, d4 takes, knight c6, bishop e3, knight f6, bishop c4. So here, my recommendation is the move queen a5. Of course, castles is not bad as we give in our black book, but the ideas are quite similar. I lately have been preferring queen a5 because you immediately put pressure on white's king. So white castles more or less by force, and after castles, bishop b3. This is the main line of the accelerated dragon where white castles short. So here, after the move d6, this is the new idea that I faced recently at the Chicago Open, and the idea here is white plays immediately move knight to d5. I have never faced this move before. More or less h3 stopping knight g4 is an autopilot move. With the same idea, white has tried f3, which is less popular, but I would say that h3 is by far the most popular way for white to play. So knight d5 sort of caught me by surprise, and I want you guys to be aware of this move in case you face it yourselves. So the first question is, why can't we take the pawn on e4? So this is actually a pretty big trap that you have to know about, or you can figure out over the board. So here white wins a pawn by force. So here white can take with check and take on e7, and you see there's a problem. After king h8, the pawn on c6 is under attack. So after knight takes c6, black's position is in ruins, queen's under attack, the d pawn is too weak, white should be close to winning here. So this is something that you have to know. So going back to the position, this is actually an immediate threat. White wants to take on c6 and then take on e7 with check. So I played a pretty logical move, rook to e8, but just to show you, another idea that came to my mind was knight takes d5. And unfortunately here, after pawn takes knight e5, this is the typical idea, white has pretty promising position because of the pressure that the d pawn creates against e7 and d6 pawns. So long term, white's going to put pressure over here. So first white can play h3 with a pretty nice advantage. Another interesting move here is a4, trying to go for queenside expansion. Maybe knight b5 is an idea. In general, I did not want to improve white's pawn structure in the center. So rook e8 is the move that I liked. And here my opponent, Grandmaster Mitkov from Macedonia, who now lives in Chicago, plays knight takes f6 check. Well, this was a logical follow-up because e-pawn was hanging, bishop takes f6 and c3. So typically trades favor black in all sorts of Sicilians, including the accelerated dragon. And one may say that this position is simply good for black. But in reality, the position is not as simple because logical moves such as bishop d7 is perhaps playable, but to me, I didn't really see the point. What if white simply plays f4? Only later, when I analyze this position a little bit deeper with engines, specifically with Stockfish, did I realize that black has a very nice simplification idea. If you want equality, you can simply take the knight on d4, and the line that I didn't quite like is pawn takes d4. And during the game, I thought that, okay, I've improved white's center, e5 is really annoying, and I don't really get much counterplay. But in reality, black can equalize with this move e6. Believe it or not, after e5, bishop g7, white has absolutely no threats. If white takes the pawn on d6, we're gonna win it back with queen d4. This pawn is not going anywhere, whereas this guy is a target and the bishop has a very nice diagonal. And if we go back to this position, white can also take with the bishop. In this case, black simply trades to get into equality. And after queen takes, queen c5, we have equalized. And if pawn takes, same idea, we play e6 to prepare bishop c6, and black once again neutralizes the bishop on b3. So this is a way to equalize the game, but I actually thought my move was more interesting. I played queen c7. At first you may wonder, well, you're not developing the bishop and you're moving backwards, wasting a tempo. But in reality, I had a very specific idea in mind. Knight a5 to neutralize the bishop, possibly to take it, or to play knight c4 and put more pressure on white. I found only one game in the database where black played a little bit differently in the London candidates in 2013, Grishuk against Ivanchuk. Ivanchuk played the move knight e5 immediately, but I don't like this move honestly, because knight c4 is not a threat, and here instead of Grishuk's move h3, which I think loses most of the advantage because of a very nice idea that Ivanchuk found out, queen a6. As a matter of fact, this idea is quite common in other lines. As you watched my videos, you probably have seen the idea, especially when the rook's on e1, queen on e2, queen a6, stopping f4, trying to get the knight to c4. So these kind of ideas are very common, but I would say that in this specific instance, it's simply not good. f4 exclam is the problem. And after logical move knight g4, white simply drops back to c1. And turns out that the knight in g4 is really loose, h3 is coming, and if you take, pawn takes, knight f6, f5, sacking the e4 pawn gives white incredible attack. Notice that without the bishop on g7, white's power on the diagonal is even stronger. So this is something you want to avoid. So queen c7 is what I played, and even though it's not quite a formal novelty, the idea to play knight a5 is completely new in this variation. So f4 is a logical move, and now my novelty, knight a5. Very logical novelty. Bishop d7 I don't like because white just plays f5 with queen g4. This has been played once before. White just simply gets a free attack. So knight a5 immediately putting pressure on the bishop is what I like. And here my opponent went into pretty deep think, because obviously trying to save the bishop results in knight c4, and black gets a dream position. You would have to play bishop c1, and here I have many different plans, including a6 b5, or trying to break through with e5. So basically a lot of ideas, and black is doing quite well. So in the game, my opponent played knight b5, hitting the queen with a tempo. Okay, I have to react. I played queen b8, protecting the pawn. And here again, my grandmaster opponent went to very deep think, and he played the move f5. Clearly he is trying to continue the attack, and he doesn't care about the b3 bishop. So I honestly didn't see anything else for white. Tactics simply don't work. a7 is under control. I mean, you may wonder about this e5 move, because obviously I cannot take with the bishop due to f7 hanging, but luckily queen takes e5 is a double attack, and there's really not much white can do about it. White is in trouble. So this is the kind of lines that we were both calculating. So he plays f5, which is a logical follow-up of f4. Now I get the bishop. It's quite important to not allow white have that attack. Pawn takes a6. And here, again, black has to be slightly accurate after pawn takes g6. You may wonder, why can't you just simply take the knight? Well, let's see if you can figure it out on your own. White has a very powerful tactic here. Not a difficult one, but immediately exposing the fact that all your pieces are really poorly placed on the back rank. Pawn takes f7, and now queen h5, game over. You can play king f8, but then the bishop comes and the rook on e8 is lost. If you play king g8 right away, queen takes e8, same fate. So this is simply bad. So after f takes g, black doesn't need to go after the knight. I like my move, pawn takes g6, and after knight takes d6, this was his point, I simply go into this endgame. Queen takes, pawn takes, rook takes e4 with complete equality. Notice that he can't take the pawn because the bishop is hanging. If he protects the bishop, if king f2, I play bishop e6, and eventually the game was drawn relatively easily. So again, let's review the key ideas. After knight d5, white has an immediate threat to take on c6 and take on e7, so you have to play rook e8. And here, after the logical sequence takes c3, bishop d7 is probably okay, but it kind of dries the game out with equality, followed by knight takes d4. I like queen c7 more, with idea knight a5, and after f4, knight a5, black gets great counterplay, and after a very long thought, my opponent plays knight b5, queen b8, f5, and the game peters out to a draw after this fourth sequence. Takes, a6, take on g6, pawn takes, and the sack, temporary sack, knight takes d6. But the opposite color, bishop endgame, is simply a draw. There is really not much either side can do. So I hope you get to enjoy this video, and now you have an answer for move 10, knight d5. Thank you.